Good to go.
Oh, I was waiting for Jim.
I said we're good to go. Oh, it's okay. Cat TV.
I know, I heard Cat TV was here, but I didn't know what. Okay, I'm here going to the, January 8th, 2024. It's Southwest Vermont Supervisory Union Drafting Policy Committee. First of all, I'd like to just welcome everybody back for the new years and say Happy New Year to everybody. Hope we had a good holiday. The agenda for tonight is we have public comments, we have minutes from our last meeting, November the 6th. We have several policies, 50, 80 for dress code, 5120 for concussion management, 5156 nutrition and wellness annual review. And FYI, we have 5140 for communicable disease administration regulations update. We have the tracking sheet, and we have other items for further consideration down below. And our next policy meeting is scheduled for February 5th. There's no objections to those. So do we need to change anything on this agenda? Hearing none and seeing none, then let's begin with the. Before we begin with that, I was going to say that public comment. This is the first meeting of the year, and I wanted to make sure everybody understand where the policies are on the SVSU website. And this is because when the people watch the Cat TV, they'll know that you can go to the SVSU website to see the policies that are all been approved and ready for them to see. The policies that we're working on won't be on that website for you to review until we go through the process of warning and adoption, and then they'll wind up getting there. That brings me to this point that for the committee and for the boards, what we do here is we set a policy for the SVSU member districts. And these we go through the warning process. We discuss things here to the best of our ability and prepare it, and then we disseminate it out to the boards for a warning. Now, what happens under the warning? Input from every board can be provided back to this board so that we can consider that input before we move on to the next stage of adoption. So at all of the individual boards, there should be no reason why our policy don't go through the warning process. If someone have a question, that's where that information should be sent back to the board, back here, so that we can discuss it and consider any changes and give any feedback that we need to give concerning the questions that anybody may have. Once we do that, we send the policy back out. If we need to send it to our legal group and have them take a look at it, we'll do that and make sure that we're not violating anything legally wise. And then we'll have that policy prepared and sent back for adoption. It comes back here to this committee, we go over it again, and we said, okay, it's ready to go out for adoption. And we disseminate it again back to all of the boards for adoption. And hopefully by that time, we've answered everybody's question. But now, any policy, whether it's adopted or not, if there is something that really needs to change, that's how we created an agenda. Somebody can say, okay, there's something on the policy that needs to happen here that we think everybody missed out here as far as the agenda is concerned. And we can bring that policy back, put it out on the agenda. We have several that come back when the nurses or anybody else have a chance to look at something, they want to update something. for the new regs and so forth, they send that information back to us. It's a legal person, then looks at the policy and says, whoa, the state has something, Vermont School Board has something that you may be in violation to, it may be touchy, and we want to reword that or change that. We get that information and make sure that we work through the process of administrating all of those things to get the policy ready to move on to the next phase. So I wanted to just bring that up to make sure that everybody know how input and everything is happening here, and that we need that input back from you when you see that warning. It should be captured at the board meetings in your minutes. At your board, district board, your concern should be in the minutes, and those minutes come back and they go to Lisa, or they go to Laura, or I'll see them, and then we can address those issues. So we got an avenue to get all that stuff back to us. Following that, now we'll like to have a public comment. And I don't know, is that anyone
trying to think, I don't see anyone. No.
There's none. The minutes from November 6th, policy committee. Hopefully everyone had a chance to look at that. If we need a motion to adopt the minutes as written, as it was provided at the November 6th meeting. We have a motion. It would.
Yeah.
Chris, and second, we're not big enough to maybe have a second, but that's okay. We're going. So all in favor of the minutes as presented, just come in and raise your hand to aye, and
Aye.
we're all set. Any objection? Any abstaining? Okay, the minutes are accepted as provided. The first policy is policy 5080, dress codes. And in the dress code policy, this went through a lot of work. This,
That made you co-host.
yeah. And this went through a lot of work all summer with administrators and so forth, looking at and providing input back to the old version of the policy. That's why you see a lot of strike-throughs on here. They were having a hard time trying to implement the things at this modern day and time. So what was done was a paragraph that's highlighted there that provided an all-inclusive interpretation of what the dress code policy should be. This is not regs now. This is the policy. Because the regs is something different. It's how we're going to implement this at the board level. And individual boards, depending on the level of the elementary, the middle school, or the high school, may have a different process of different interpretation for the kids based on their age. So they would send that information to the board and says, hey, we want to have a elementary board wants to have this particular type of information in there for our students because they're small and they shouldn't be wearing or doing this along this line. And that's fine because that's what we want to have is what's appropriate for that age group. The middle school is a real challenging piece. I mean, you don't know whether you're going too far or you got too tight with the middle school, but so they have a hard thing on their hands to deal with in terms of policy. So they take a look at it and say, we need to do these particular things, and the middle school has a sixth grade. They have two as well. And so it's part of the elementary, so they bounce back and forth for what we need to have in there for a dress code for them. And then the high school has something different along that line. So we'll need some information from each one of those. If you feel that you need something outside of this particular paragraph. And so let me just go through this paragraph. I'm gonna go through it just to make sure it is all inclusive. And it says, the Southwest Vermont Supervisory Union is committed to creating a positive learning environment for all students. All students. The purpose of the SVSU dress code is to promote a body positive environment while respecting the freedom of students to express their individuality. Okay. All students should expect a safe learning environment and feel welcome to upholding standards that foster a secure and equitable community. That's a lot. The purpose of the SVSU dress code is not the marginalization or oppression of any group based on race, sex, gender, identity expression of sexual orientation, ethnicity, or religion, cultural observance, household income, body type, size. The SVSU dress code is designed with the focus on teaching and learning. So with that, it paves the way for the individuals at the elementary level, in the middle school, and the high school to try to do whatever is appropriate for that and get that to us as an administrative regs to that with administrators in it, because your principals and the teachers at that level should have some input. They need to be able to say, we can do this, this is what we need to have at this level and be appropriate. So that's what this is, and I just wanted to cover that, and then we can have some discussion if you have some discussion on this particular policy. Does anyone want to weigh in on something?
I would, if it's okay.
Sandy has a weigh. Okay.
So I love the fact that you've addressed this philosophy, because I think it's really important. And I think that it needs to go a little bit farther, because it's not really a code, it's a philosophy. And as a parent, I want to be able to take my child to the store and say, I know you love this item, yet it's really not appropriate for school. And not only do I believe that, but it's also in the dress code. And so what I was hoping for was to have some general guidelines, and the guidelines can be the same regardless of whether you're in elementary school or high school, because they're based on the fact that you want a positive learning environment for all. So it's a respect for yourself, respect for the apparel that you're wearing. And I think that those guidelines should be in the policy. Now, if you want to get into the details later on as to what happens if you choose not to dress by the code, then that I certainly believe could go into a admin reg. But I think that if you're going to have a policy, that it should share what it is that you're hoping to see, to actually see. And we, when we brought it up at the board meeting, we're not sure who had to make that final say. And that means that this isn't a policy for K to 12. It's a policy for the middle school, the elementary school, and high school. And I think that you can blanket it to make it one. That's a lot. I'm sorry, that's a lot.
It's a lot, but and again, I'm hearing input, but then you got all of the elementary schools, and they may not feel that way. And that's why whatever is appropriate for that age group of kids need to come from a collective group and says, this is what needs to happen. What we try to get away from is the specifics of things in the policy. because then we gotta come back and go through this whole process. The administrative regs we can change without having to go back through the policy. So whatever it is that you think that need to be appropriate for the kids at that level, and same thing if we're duplicating information for the middle school or the high school, it's their input. And if that changed at any point in time, they can change it without having to go back to the policy. And that's why that's not in here. And we're waiting, once we go through this, we'll be looking for input as hands-on, what you think may be appropriate for the elementary group and what may be appropriate for the middle school within this guidelines here. And these are all encompass guidelines. I mean,
It's not a code then. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but then it doesn't become a dress code as a policy, it's a philosophy. So maybe we could just change it, instead of saying dress code, we could call it something else, so that it's, because we don't have a code here of what we are and aren't expecting. And I absolutely believe that the learning environment could get disrupted by some of the choices that students could take. And I would like to be able to share that in the actual policy and not wait until later on and decide what is appropriate and who is making that decision. So we're saying that the school board is not going to decide what is appropriate for our students, that we've given that a way to say, we don't know, or we don't want to make that decision as to what's appropriate and what's not appropriate.
the school board does. It's going to come from the school board. I mean, the name can be anything, dress code, or along that line, just for discussion. But the school board at the elementary level is going to get input from parents and teachers and whatever, and say, this is what needs to happen here at this level. That's what we want. I personally don't want to try to take and go and start going to shop and say, I'm going into a supermarket and say, this is appropriate for an elementary kid, this is appropriate for a middle school. You need parents' concerns and you need administrators' concerned. You need to make sure that they're not being distracted, and creating a problem in terms of this dress code and not being marginalized and so forth along that line. You need all that to be considered out there for a parent, and then say, okay, this we can do without having.
And that's why I think we're not ready to move forward on this, that we are creating something without that input. Because at the middle school, there is one principal. At the high school, there is one principal. At the elementary level, we have several principals. And we need to be consistent across every school. And something that.
principals at high school.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, Ron.
But I don't understand what you mean by not being able to move forward. The policy is separate. It's a document that provides the guidelines for everybody to be able to generate some administrative regs. I don't see anything wrong with this. I mean, we're saying dress code, whatever in terms of name. If we think we need to really change the name for something else
It's
out
not
here.
a code, that's my piece.
And I don't have a problem, but if we want to change the name from a dress code to something else, what would we change it to?
So here's a thought that occurs to me. So Sandy brought up these thoughts, these reflections on this policy as another member of the elementary school board. And I just, in all frankness, I don't think I got it until tonight. And I think now I'm understanding what you're putting close to, Sandy. Maybe it feels like there's a missing link in the policy, that there needs to be some acknowledgement in the policy itself that the specifics of the dress code are going to be addressed in admin regs, and how those specifics are going to be developed. That way it does in fact reinforce the idea that this is a code, and it specifies that it's who is responsible for promulgating that code.
I think that, and I could be wrong, But I think that the superintendent is responsible for all the admin regs. I think there's a policy on it somewhere that shares that
It is.
the superintendent has to write all of the regs.
So we're covered with that, that's what I'm saying, you know, I'm trying to figure out what you think. The policy is coming from the boards up here, and then we're saying that, the implementation of that comes with the administrators, the superintendent, and it works with the policy, the different, principals at that level, this group and that group, and say what's appropriate. And you can't be more consistent in trying to do that and doing that way, and without us here trying to do something that's going to say this is, for elementary, middle school, and so forth. This language is enough in that topic to cover everybody, as opposed to trying to get the specifics in it.
What if we added the following language? And I would just ask everyone to hear this and so from one perspective, see if it feels superfluous, from the other perspective, see if it answers those concerns that have been put on the table. What if another paragraph was added? Something along the lines of, given the various age groups served within the supervisory union, specifics for each grade level will be developed with input from educational staff and school boards and reflected in administrative regs.
We can add that, but that's true for every policy.
But what it specifies is that the implementation is going to look different at different grade levels, which I don't think is necessarily reflected in all admin regs for all policies. And it specifies how they're going to be developed, which I think, Sandy, if I'm understanding you, is one of your concerns.
Yes.
Okay.
It is, very much so. And because a student would go from various different elementary schools, it needs to be consistent. And if you have a different principal in every elementary school, then there's a possibility that you're going to get a different look as to what you can wear or not wear.
Well, it depends. We're talking about consistency here now. Elementary, with the superintendent, is going to be elementary. I don't care where you're from. We're talking about elementary level, age appropriate kids. And that's the responsibility of the superintendent, with some input from the principals and parents, and making sure they are consistent out there. So one school shouldn't be saying, yeah, I'm gonna do this versus that. They have to go through the superintendent. You got it. Because what we'll create is that once you leave the elementary and you go to another phase, or you may switch schools, now we got problems.
And that's the other piece of this. That's why if you had general guidelines and then specific guidelines, and I actually did create something, because I don't want to come empty-handed, where it starts out where I just said, had it in the 5 different categories: modesty, respect, footwear, head, width, and colors and patterns. Specifically those categories, because then it doesn't matter whether you're in kindergarten or 12th. You're still going to have a general guideline of what is appropriate for this learning, for a learning environment.
I hear you, but I'm trying to make sure that we don't put something in the policy that's going to be a problem.
It isn't like this, if that's.
No, I'm just saying that to put the specifics in here when hats or whatever it is, those things change. Most kids don't even wear them. I think we need to put, I don't know, but I'm just trying to make sure that what we do from a policy stand of view, that we have a document that addresses all of those things. And this paragraph addresses all of those, but then we definitely need to have some input at the elementary and the middle school level and so forth along that line for addressing things. You got it. Mm-hmm. And so I won't be sitting in here, and I wouldn't be asking anybody else to be sitting in here and talk about what's appropriate for the high school person that's 16 or 17 or 18 years old to wear and not be disrupted in this, and have the administrators try to deal with that when it's not necessarily something that we should be dealing with. But at the elementary level, by far, you won't have that same kid dressing like they were at 16 or 17 years old at that level. And that input comes from that group.
Could I add
Laura.
something? Sandy, this policy was brought forward by the principals prior to last summer, and they actually asked for a work group to come together. So the good news is we had and they came actually to the first, a subgroup of them came to this policy committee at the beginning of the year with to present his piece. So there was a principal from one of the principals from the high school, from the middle school, from Arlington, from the elementary school. There's one principal representing the elementary schools. Mm-hmm. And then one of the tasks that they did is they took their work and they shared it with the entire administrative team at our admin retreat this summer to get feedback, knowing that the admin regs that will follow, they're gonna have input. So these changes were driven. So I appreciate what you're saying about really like outlining, because I know that's their next step in the admin regs is outlining what it looks like at each level. So I just wanted you to know that there's representation.
I do appreciate that. So back to your words, if something like that was added so that we know that something is looked at.
Well, I personally don't have a problem with adding a statement in this case if everybody's concerned about the dress code and saying, okay, I think Chris had a statement that was pretty good that everything below this is going to be generating administrative rates that's appropriate for high school, middle school, and elementary. And the input is going to be whatever way we want to get it. So I don't have a problem with that, except somebody have a problem with that statement being in that way. The only thing that I said is that that's true for every policy that we have.
That's also your answer. That's true.
And that is, so.
So the next piece I would ask is what is the timeline for the admin procedures?
This,
They're a very active group.
Yeah,
right, I'm
They're
saying,
very
but we
it'll
don't,
probably be very short once it's completely adopted.
They had started with that process because last summer, the state of Vermont required updates to all the handbooks and provided guidelines. So the whole thing was prompted by changes that were coming down the pike. So it was a timely conversation. And they were very actively engaged in the process. We had a pretty hefty team that was very active during the summer and passionate about this work. So I think it'll happen pretty quickly.
and so, but the input to that is that this board won't tie the hands of administration in terms of saying, what's a timeline you're gonna be able to provide?
I'm just asking.
Yeah, I'm just saying that we won't do that. That'll happen at the elementary level. That's elementary boards are saying, hey, look, we need to have this, and that's when you start to talk about and get that stuff at that part, as opposed to saying that come through us here, because the superintendent and administrations, they got a whole district to manage. And I can't start to prioritize the workload and how we're gonna manage things. All I know is it should be happening in a timely manner.
Just trying to help.
Yeah, that's okay.
So I think so that, there were a few members of the elementary board who had concerns about, I think, what was felt the vagueness of the proposed policy. I don't know if the language, the sample language that is throughout there, I don't know that would satisfy all the other concerns. I also can understand that, not every board is gonna agree 100% of each time, and not every committee is gonna be comprised of people that always agree. And so if we need to push this through, and if there's not unanimity on the elementary board for warning and adopting this, then, so be it, we can sort it out on that end. I think you're absolutely right that the proposed language that I just offered is the same for every policy. That admin regs are drafted as a result of input from the boards and from the educational teams.
So it's just, we would be repeating that, and creating a work
Yeah, so as you say that, I don't know that I would even necessarily move that we add that language because it is superfluous, because that's just how every policy works. But just one person, so I think it's just because it was the elementary board who is holding this process up, I don't necessarily want to, I'm not gonna demand certainly that we take any particular step.
Oh, you can take that back to the elementary board and
Check. All right, we're gonna add it to the agenda. We don't have any policy we're gonna talk about.
Oh, yes, you do. It's already on your agenda. I don't have no notes.
Is there anything else?
All right.
I think, we got, should have said at the time, we have a short time period because we got another meeting at 5:30. See that, so, all right, well, thank you, Freddie, for all of that healthy conversation, because that stirred up a lot of parents out there and so forth, for working out fine so that they can get active. We want the public and the school parents and kids to be actively involved in understanding what the policy is, and so this raised some concerns for them to start trying to think about and provide input to somebody, to the teachers, the principals, and so forth. Okay, well, with that, then this policy can continue on. And it's all, before it goes any further, according to our PSD, needed to, confirm. Okay.
Unless there's a tie tomorrow, we will have some kind of action on this.
Okay.
We will have a final answer, whether we cannot move forward or whether or not we agree to warn it. Final answer will be had after tomorrow night.
Okay. Thank you, that's better than, having to watch cat TV. Concussion management, 5120 is next on here. And in this policy, we had some discussion at the SVSU level concerning that, and I think what this concussion protocol is to make sure that everybody is on board with the concussion process and not think that it's only for athletes out there. We have concussions coming in from other areas. And so the question that someone was bringing or raising is, well, who's gonna do this at the elementary level, whatever? You got a nurse. You got parents that are bringing their kids and say, I have an issue, and we took them to the doctor, and the doctor has this document here that says this, and it tells you that they should be doing it at a restricted level of education until they have acquired the ability to manage it all. That's who's gonna manage it at those levels outside of the athlete. I mean, in terms of the high school that has a trainer that still provide information, but the trainer at the high school follow it, the nurses at the elementary levels follow it. And so we have a method of managing all of that. So that's what I think the concern was. So you can have input here if you, from somebody on 5120 concerning this policy.
So at the elementary level, there were questions as to whether, exactly what you said, the question is whether or not the school nurses at the elementary level met the criteria for being a licensed healthcare provider pursuant to Title 26. That's the language from the policy itself. Essentially, like, do the school nurses in our elementary schools have the training and certification they need to be able to diagnose concussion in the moment, or to approve return to learn or return to play afterwards? So that was part of the question.
I just, Ashley Walker was gonna be here tonight, and then she unfortunately had an appointment, but she passed on some information. I'm just gonna read what she wrote, if that's okay.
Okay.
She,
Was a gentleman when Ashley Walker. She's our nurse leader and the nurse assistant.
she's our lead nurse in our connection to the state. She just wanted you all to know that all the information for this policy comes directly from the Agency on Education, concussion guidelines. which was created and drafted with that guidance with the school nursing team. And then our attorney, Dina Atwood, also previewed the policy. Title 26 refers to the level of practice of the healthcare person. And then under diagnosis of a concussion, if a student is suspected of having a concussion by either the school nurse, parent, or athletic department, they must be seen by a medical provider prior to returning to school. This may include express care if the emergency room provider of primary care is unavailable. And she said, again, after the policy is approved, there will be administrative regulations that get really specific. So she just wanted to pass that on, but apologize for not being able to be here tonight.
Sandy, you got it?
Well, I don't think it answered the question that Chris brought up in the respect of, the school nurse isn't listed as the licensed healthcare professional in the policy, as a person able to diagnose regular RN. And I thought that was the question from our board, or one of them.
So let me, you know, I don't have a license, but I have to take the concussion protocol every year for every sport. And part of my job right now is a basketball, and so that's the season I'm in, on the football, is to recognize that somebody got a joke. And I look at them and ask them a question and say, look, you gotta go out, you gotta go to the coach or your trainer, and that's it. And you're not coming back until somebody certified that you're able to come back. That's what I do. And so I'm not one of them, whatever I'm on. And say a teacher, somebody falls on the ground or floor or run into the wall, and then they start to look dazed and they don't know where they are. They should know that something is wrong here. We got to get that person to the nurse, and the nurse got to look at them and says, okay, something is actually happening here. We need to get that person, based on the concussion protocol, out into to medical care, and the medical doctor is going to come back and say, hey, yes, they did have it, and they need to be slowly worked back into the school system just like everybody else, and that's going to be held.
Yeah, that was my understanding. Wasn't that the nurse would diagnose the concussion. It would be the nurse is saying, you need to go get looked at to get diagnosed. Right?
Go ahead, you first.
Maybe I understood it wrong, but
No,
it
so-
wasn't that the nurse was making that.
Right, so but I think the question was, could the nurse be doing? So under the definition for licensed healthcare professional, we have the phrase other healthcare provider. One, the question was, are our school nurses licensed pursuant to Title 26, which is one of the determinants right up there, sorry. That was one of the questions. Then also, if there's an order of preference given to medical providers, like is it the primary care physician who can overrule the athletic trainer if there's a disagreement? Like, how is that? If a licensed healthcare professional, according to this definition, has a different opinion from another licensed healthcare professional, who do we listen to? Who do we tell? I think
they better have a lot of good insurance. Is what I'm thinking. If somebody is going to send somebody back out because specifically they don't understand the concussion protocol, and it talks about if you bring somebody back in early and they have another concussion, it's just twice as bad. And so the problem I'm trying to see, if somebody out here that may be doing something, they're looking for another job somewhere else. If they don't understand what needs to be happening in terms of a student, not rushing them back into school, is not pressure to do that. Was that the best interest of the student that says the level of education, the reading and writing or jumping and so forth is controlled until you can prove that you can manage that. And all of that goes back again to the elementary level and says, well, if you think everything is okay and you say you want to send them back to the doctor, send them back to the doctor, because the doctor can do that. The nurses don't have to be spelled out no more than me, that recognize, and you should recognize a concussion has occurred with somebody.
So I suspect this is another situation where members of the elementary school board were looking for more specificity that is instead is intended to be used through admin rights.
Yeah.
And if I could add to that, I think that because in the policy itself, in the statement, it says that the policy provides context and clarity for school, students, personnel in the following ways: identifying concussions, managing students' return, and return to play. And that's in line 7. And that's where it started, the discussion started. Who can be identified to determine if there's a concussion? And that's, I thought, one of the reasons why it held it up in our discussion.
I understand. I think probably somebody needs to go through that concussion protocol. Because all of these questions are coming up for the fact that, you know, like I said, every sport I have to do, every year I'm doing a concussion protocol. I sit down at my computer and I'm going through and they.
Sure. But as the ref for those basketball games, you are not a licensed healthcare professional.
I am not.
Right, as defined, right. So like, I think the common sense rule would apply to anybody who, you know, is possession of authority over kids.
But
I think this drills down a little bit deeper, and I think that's what folks on the elementary board had questions about.
But I'm one right on the floor and said, oh, this guy got an elbow. And my job as an official is to look at him and say, oh, he's Daisy. I'm sending him out.
Yeah,
that's all I'm doing is sending him out. If the kid is on the playground and they run into a tree and the teacher says, whoa, something's wrong here, I'm sending them to the nurse because something happened here. That's what you do now. And the nurse says, yeah, you're right. Something is not right with this kid. So then you said, we need to make sure we get this person based on concussion immediately taken to the hospital or whatever along that line. That's what's already documented. Okay, so.
I know it's late. My
Well.
apologies.
What's that?
My apologies, because I know it's getting late for you for your next meeting.
Well, we want to make sure we get all the things right, so.
I still think that would be a sticky piece on
It's
that.
a sticking piece for unanimity. It's not necessarily a sticking piece for us to move.
Yeah.
That's right. That's what I'm trying to make sure you understand. And so everybody should learn stuff about it. I don't know what time it is here, but I definitely got to get to the next policy.
5:20.
5:20. We said we had to be done at 5:30.
Next meeting starts in this room at 5.
5:30. So the next one on here is something that we have to do every year. Is a nutrition and wellness policy. 5156 is required, and we have to review this annually so that we can make sure that we understand, and administrators have gone through it and so forth. So along this line, and I didn't see anything here that could not be, that would hold us up from continuing to do what it's supposed to do in terms of having to review this annually here. I do know that there is, the Vermont School Board Association has a local wellness guideline, and this is by 2025. Everybody, this policy as it exists right now will be replaced by a whole bunch of things that are in this packet from the Vermont School Board, and they are going to be looking for input from the different boards concerning this information that's in this particular document. So that's all I have for that. If everybody is all set, we can move along with that. Okay. The last one here, got a benefits communicable disease, and I had to ask myself the questions because I didn't know the difference. 5140 spells out the differences between some of the community of diseases, and specifically it said bed bugs and lice. I thought all of these things were treated the same, you know, along the line. So that's what's basically in here, and address those things, and what has to be reported to the Vermont Department of Health and so forth is outlined in this particular policy. So in the administrative regs piece. So the policy stayed the same, it was just the administrative regs that they added a whole bunch of things in for you to be able to address. Get a clear understanding from. And that came through with the nurses who was all those particular things, making sure we have all the new and latest, greatest information concerning that. Unless anyone have a problem with that, that was an FYI for the rigs. And then we have the tracking sheet, and on this particular tracking sheet, there are only 2 items on here that I want to say. We know that Sandgate doesn't meet on a regular basis, and when they do meet, eventually in catch up, they'll catch up with us on the policies. And then we have the SVU ESD school district that has these 2 that will be bringing back to their board to discuss. And so with that, our next meeting is planned for February the 5th if we have time, because there's a lot of things going on. Is there anything else that need to happen before this committee tonight? The policies, the concern. And again, keep, this is for the public, you can still keep sending information. If there's some particular policy that you want to see us address, and you do say something, we want to get it on the agenda, because we have future consideration policies on here. We get them and look at them, and then we'll work on moving along. Okay, with that, I'd like to have a motion to dismiss. So moved. Anybody have any objections, any comments? If not, everyone, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you for being here tonight.
Done by 5:30,